Good afternoon, my friends. I just wanted to jump on today and do a quick book of knowledge. I have had several questions again about stitching 1/1 and avoiding your threads slipping underneath the fabric thread. So, what I thought we'd do is just review that one more time, or again, because there are quite a few new people here who probably have not heard this before. And I'd also did some looking up on the use of thread magic and wax on your threads. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about that. Okay, so let's get started. I'm at a place where I am just working on one color, as you can see. So this will make explaining stitching over one a bit, or explaining avoiding your thread slipping a bit easier. So, whoops, let's have a look if I don't bump my head on the camera. Maybe I better go up just a little bit higher. Okay, and I'll move just a little bit. Okay. Oh, sorry about that, guys. I'm probably making you sick. I ended up right back where I was, but we will try very hard not to bump. So I'm going to be stitching across this row right here. Okay. And what I want you to look at is the weave of the fabric, because the weave of the fabric is going to dictate how you stitch your threads so that it doesn't slip underneath how you use your floss so that it doesn't stitch underneath the fabric thread. So my first stitch is going to be right here. So I'm going to, first I want you to look, which direction does the fabric thread go at this intersection? And as you can see, the top thread is horizontal. So we're going to do the first leg the way we always do. All right. So normally you would come up in your bottom right and go down in your top left. However, the top thread of your fabric is going horizontally. So we are going to come up in the top left and go down in the bottom right. That is going to prevent the thread from slipping underneath. The reason being, we look over here, if we go down in this hole, come up in this hole, there's no place for it to go underneath because the vertical thread prevents it. Just like in this next stitch, we're going to come up in the bottom left, go down in the top right, and when we go down in the top right, because that thread is vertical, we're going to come up in the bottom right. Because once again, if you look over here at a vertical thread, you're wrapping it around that horizontal thread, and therefore it can't slip under the vertical. That making sense? Right. Let me show you one where it could slip. So here, I'm going to come up. We're going to go down. Okay. Now, that one was a horizontal, because the next one is a vertical. If I come up, if I go down here and come up vertically, it could now can do it when I want to, but it now has the ability it now would have the ability to slip underneath. Make it wiggle underneath there because there's nothing to prevent it from, there's nothing to stop it. So there, I can get it up under there, have it start to slip underneath that thread and lose it. Now, I'm having a hard time because my fabric in my Q-snap is really in here pretty tight. So it's helping to prevent it. But as you see, there, I can slip it. See how I can slip it all the way, almost all the way over? So that's why your thread slips underneath your fabric threads because it's not locked. So if I take this back out, instead of going down, instead I come up over here. I'm not gonna pull that tight. Loosen this one up. Look at that one. Right. So now, get my big hand. Hold on. Here we go. Okay. Now, if you look, you can see there that thread is actually going behind. The top thread is horizontal. The thread underneath is vertical. So if I pull on this, there's no way I can go underneath that horizontal thread because the vertical thread is preventing that. That prevents your thread from slipping. So whenever you can, it's in your best interest to look at your fabric and follow the fabric when you're crossing your threads. So, pardon me, but let me get another piece of thread here and I'll show you better at another spot where you can actually see it without having my stitching interfering. Look at that. Let's down here. I'll just out later. Here. Okay. Some thread in the middle here. Why wouldn't you always want to thread your needle in a hurry? Can't hurry. Heaven's sake. Here we go. I love these ballpoint needles. However, sometimes they just give me a bit of a fit. There we go. There we go. Okay. Just going to do an away here. All right. So let's look at this. So I'm going to come up in a bottom right-hand corner. Right. We're going to look at this intersection. That thread is going horizontally. So I'm going to go down in the top right hand corner. To prevent it from slipping, I'm just going to do one stitch here to get it anchored in a little bit. I'm going to come up in a top left, go down in a bottom right. So let's go down here and then we can really look at the structure of this. So we're going to come up. This one is a vertical. So I'm going to go down in the top right. I'm not going to pull this all the way through so that I can show you. So if I go opposite, so this is vertical. So if I go opposite and go with the bottom thread, now you will see that there's nothing to prevent it from slipping underneath. So there's my thread. Oh, look at that. Slips right under. And when you're pulling on your thread, that's why you end up with something that, oh gee, where did it go? Or why do I have a line across there? Okay. Because there's nothing to prevent it from going underneath. Now, if you go in the direction of the fabric thread, which is vertically, I'm going to pull that up, okay, and come up in the bottom right, now let's have a look at that. Okay. So, well, obviously it's not going to slip under this way, and obviously can't go anywhere if I pull this way. Can you see why? Because the horizontal thread is preventing it from slipping under the vertical thread. So that is how you prevent slippage. Like I went over a little too far there, but you get the idea. That's how you prevent your thread from slipping underneath your fabric threads, by watching the direction of your top thread, so that when you go down, whatever direction your top thread is, that dictates what corner you come up in. So if this is a vertical thread, I'm going to come up in the bottom right. If it's a horizontal thread, I'm going to come left. Now, suppose I do my stitches the other way. Suppose I always start in the bottom right. And the first leg of my X goes to the top left. Okay? It doesn't matter. The principle is still the same. Principle is still whatever direction this top thread, fabric thread is, that dictates what corner your needle comes up in next. So again, we don't want to come up in the top right, because that would allow it to slip. As you see, the thread underneath is horizontal. So there's nothing there to stop it, and it's going to slip underneath. So what you want to do then is come up in your bottom left, because now there's nothing, there's a thread there to prevent it from slipping up. So now you can see there is the thread underneath that will prevent it from slipping under. It can't. You can pull this till cows come home and it's not going to slip underneath that thread. Okay. However, if I was stitching in this one, look at that. I could slide it all the way to here. So if you stitch your normal, if you stitched your normal way of stitching, my normal way is bottom left, top right. Normally I would go bottom right, left. Every other stitch is not going to have that ability to have the thread stop from slipping up. So sometimes it's going to slip and other times it's not. And that's why. Because every other stitch does not have the bottom thread going the correct way to keep it from going underneath. Like that. Look at that. It just pulls right over. But if I do this, this is not going to display. Okay, so that's your stitching over one. So now I'm going to add a little bit onto this. This was very impromptu, so I really didn't. Let's see here. Can I turn here my Brio? Turn me on so you can see my face. Turn off my pad. Okay, where am I? Okay, where am I? Where'd I go? Brio. Okay. All right, I'm going to switch back to a different screen. Okay, hold on. Hold on. Here we go. Okay, move me up. Okay, I didn't put any makeup or anything on today. So what you see is kind of what you get. Sorry. Let's get a little more light here. A little more light. There we go. Okay. Okay. Oh, look, I should keep my arm up there and then it'll be pretty good. Hold on. Maybe this way. Okay. I need to buy a ring light, don't I? Go ahead, say that. Go ahead, tell me. Probably the light in the back. Anyway, we talked on my last live, we were talking about wax and thread and how it may or may not affect your threads. And Jamie was so kind to do an experiment, and you can see that experiment on Facebook in the diagonal group where she actually waxed some threads and then she had threads that were waxed and threads that were not waxed. And then she washed them to see if that wax came off, if there was a difference. And I believe that she used beeswax. And let me find it here. Her comment was, oh my goodness. I like my iPad better than this Samsung because sometimes okay. Okay, here we go. Here we go. We discussed, okay, I just had to do an experiment for both of us. Here are some pics before and after, and you can see these in the diagonal group. I ran the threads 3 times through wax like I do for my project. Way too much, I'm sure. Did I mention I hate to thread needles? Yes, it's a thing. It's a thing. The nice coat keeps my threads from tangling when I park my threads with needle. The first pic shows one side unwaxed, which is the left side, and the other side waxed. You can definitely see the difference between the waxed and the unwaxed thread. Next pic is both washed with a small amount of soap and patted dry. I really can't see a difference. I had a hard time telling which side was waxed and which one was unwaxed. I chose the least fuzzy one on the right as the wax. I should have marked which was which before I washed them, but it would have been the same result. I thought this didn't matter, but obviously it does. So I did ask her if it was that she couldn't see a difference between previous to washing and washing, or if she couldn't see a difference on her ones that she washed and after they were washed, the waxed and unwaxed looked the same. So I asked her to clarify that exactly what she meant, but I'm taking it from the way that she said that she thought it didn't matter, but obviously it does, means that the waxing really stayed on the thread. And it doesn't necessarily wash out the way we think it does. So that was Jamie's. So after that, I did some research, a little bit of research, and I looked up thread magic. And of course, it says it's designed to condition thread, makes threads more manageable, extends the life of the finished work for many years, far longer than untreated or wax treated threads, with none of the disadvantages of wax products. Okay. It reduces friction and drag by 400% over wax and 700% over untreated threads. So it has a purpose. It does have a purpose. And it means that you'll have less fatigue in your hand or your wrist. It extends the life of your project because it creates an invisible, virtually impenetrable coating on your thread to protect it from damaging UV rays, mold, and mildew. Okay, so it reduces thread drag. It provides protection from UV rays, mold, and mildew. It reduces tangling and knotting with static electricity, which is why the threads won't twist on each other. It will keep them from doing that. In fact, it actually has them repel each other, which is an advantage because then it makes your threads lay side by side when you're stitching with 2 strands. It won't melt or freeze like wax. It's acid free. Now, here's the ones that bother me. It can be laundered and ironed without staining or marking thread or fabric. It won't be harmed by detergent, fabric softener, or even bleach. And it's supposedly safe for all fabric and threads, and it's not a petroleum project. So, what that's saying to me is it does not come off of your threads. So, when you use Thread Magic, it is permanently there. And yes, it is going to be advantageous when you're stitching. Um, it's acid free, non toxic, pH of 7. However, That being said, if you are doing an heirloom project like we were talking about, over time, what is that going to do to your thread? That would be my question, because it is not like some people thought, it's not going to wash off. It's not going to, yeah, you can wash it, you can rinse it, you can iron it, you can do all of that good stuff to it. You can put it in the freezer and it's not going to come off your off your threads. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're making those choices of, do I want to use it or do I not want to use it? Or do I want to use it just in certain instances, or do I want to use it all the time? And again, totally up to you. I just want to provide you with information to make an informed decision about, do you want to use these products or do you not want to use products, and what are your hopes for that piece in the future? Okay. Um, yeah, here it says it's a unique, completely safe chemical compound. It will not freeze or melt like waxes do. It can be left in the sun, and needlework made with Thread Magic treated thread can be ironed and dried in a dryer with no fear of the coating melting or bleeding onto the fabric. At temperatures above 600 degrees, which would probably burn your thread, Thread Magic simply evaporates. So you have to have it at 600 degrees before it's going to evaporate from your fabric. So that's Thread Magic. Then Mary Corbet, uh, and I'm not sure how many of you know of Mary Corbet. She has the blog Needle and Thread, and she is, I highly value what she says about needlework and products she uses, and she is, wow, she's been teaching and she knows all kinds of stuff. So she says that, of course, there's been a lot of talk about this in the industry, and especially since Thread Heaven went out of production, because I think that's what brought it all up, because people were going, oh geez, now what am I going to use instead of Thread Heaven? Okay, what are my options? And that's when people, well, that's when I heard of Thread Magic, and then there was a lot of discussion about beeswax. So he wanted to address in this blog, and I can put both of these links in the drop down box so that you can read them for yourself. She was addressing conditioning and the use of beeswax in embroidery. Now, I think by this point, and I don't need to reiterate that, is to know what thread conditioning means. Because it is relatively, at that time, it was new in the needlework industry, but thread conditioning means it's going to protect the thread, it's going to straighten the thread, it's going to make it smoother, obviously, it's going to prevent tangling, it's going to keep it from fraying and kinking. And most of all, what they want it for, or what you would want beeswax on your thread for, is to strengthen the thread. So, for example, you would use it for sewing on a button so that that button doesn't off right away. So you want it to make your thread stronger. A lot of quilters used it to strengthen that thread, because a quilt is an everyday, well, that time long ago was something they were using every day. So they wanted that thread to last a long time. Now, what she found out from professionals in the industry of needlework and conservationists they're saying silicone-based conditioners over time seem to have a negative impact on your threads, and a negative impact on threads that are made especially from natural fibers. So that would be your cotton, your silk, the two big ones that come to mind. They haven't really been around long enough to endure the test of time. The use of beeswax has been around a long time. Thread conditioners are new, relatively new to the industry. So, do we really know over time what they're going to do to our work? Most of the conservators agree that they're not a good choice for natural fibers. Natural fibers, cotton, silk. And if you're seeking longevity of your work, they seem to hasten rot. So they're going to shorten the amount of time it's going to take for that thread to start deteriorating. Logically speaking, and this is all on Mary's post, logically speaking, you should not need a thread conditioner to make your thread work. If your thread is not working properly for you, which means it's, well, kinking, we probably contribute to that by winding it on bobbins. But if it's not laying right, if it's untwisting, if it's uh, just plain not behaving for you, it is probably a result of the manufacturing and marketing practice. You know, uh, but thread, your embroidery thread shouldn't need to be coated with anything to work properly. If it's not working properly, it's not laying right, and it's untwisting, it's knotting up a lot. It could be the process for which it was manufactured. Yeah, if it's the case that the thread does not work satisfactorily without coating or without coating it with some kind of conditioner, then the flaw is in the thread or in the fiber content of the thread. So some of your, we all know some of our threads are blended fibers, just like fabrics are blended fibers. So then she goes on to talk about beeswax. It was used for centuries to coat threads, but only in particular instances. It was not used routinely to coat your thread. What it was used for is to strengthen and protect the thread under circumstances that thread needed to be strengthened. Example, sewing on a button, or it need to be protected. It was used to coat in gold work. It was used to coat threads before using it to sew real metal threads onto fabric. So again, it was protecting it to avoid being braided and keeping the gold nice. But it was only used for protection and strengthening. If you buy beeswax at Joann's in those little containers that you have the little thing of wax in and it's in a plastic containers, that's probably not 100% beeswax. If you're going to use beeswax, you want it to be 100%. You don't want something that's beeswax mixed with paraffin, for example. Okay, yeah, attaching objects. I'm reading this again as I'm telling you about it. As far as conservation goes, it does not have a negative impact. Uh, but it's used basically for strengthening, protecting. It's not necessarily, it's not used in everyday embroidery. And here's why. Because it changes the, stop. My thing, it's scrolling faster than I can read it. Okay. It changes the look and performance of the thread. Threads that are coated with beeswax will darken over time. That's what I noticed on my stitchers retreat. Those threads that I coated with beeswax were definitely darker than the other threads that when I stopped using it. And over time, they will get even darker. So I'm going to keep an eye on my stitchers retreat just to see if that's the case. They don't perform the same way as uncoated threads. They don't have the same spread. You know how I always say I don't necessarily worry about hoops crushing my thread, because when I wash it and iron it, those fibers are going to bounce back. Well, if you've used a lot of beeswax, they're not going to bounce back. They're not going to have that spring in them like an uncoated thread does. And they're not going to reflect light the same way. And they're going to attract dust and dirt. So I guess, and like I said, I will link all of this for you to read. But I guess the bottom line is it's your choice what you do. I'm not saying use it. I'm not saying don't use it. I'm saying here's information as to the pluses and the minuses of using it. Yes, it helps us out. Yes, it helps you to control your thread. It helps reduce friction when going through the fabric and all of those good things that it can do. But there are downsides to using these products. And it's all a question of what do you want? What is your expectation in years to come for this project? You know, if it's something that you don't really care about, it's go for it. It's all up to you, but it's what do you want to do? And all I'm doing is providing you information so that you can make an informed decision. I find for myself, I do not use either one of these. I did it one time, but I stopped. I don't use either one. And what works best for me if I'm having trouble with thread is just a damp sponge. Run your thread over the sponge, very light, just lightly, enough to make it damp. It dries almost instantly till the time you thread it in your needle, it's dry, and then stitch with it. And I don't have any trouble. It takes the kinks out. It helps to prevent it from knotting. It doesn't kink back up. It runs through the fabric just fine. So for me, just a product like plain old everyday drinking water does the trick. So again, it's up to you. It's your choice. I'm just giving you information so that you can make an informed decision about what you'd like to do or how you'd like to stitch. So I do want to thank Jamie for doing that experiment for us. And it did sound like, I'm guessing, and correct me if I am wrong, but I'm guessing that when she washed it, the wax really did not wash out. So think about that also, that once it's there to stay. Once Red Heaven, Red Heaven, Red Magic, oh geez, whatever. Red Magic is there. It's there to stay. It is not going to come off unless you're going to heat it up to 600 degrees. And I would not want to know what that did to your stitch piece. So, again, information for you. Do with it as you wish, because, as we all know, the only rules in twist stitch are those you make for yourself. So the only rules and products that you use are those you decide for yourself. So have a great day, and I will see you next time.